Hello, it's June at the time that I'm recording this, which means it's Pride Month, and I figured why not get in with the crowd and pick up some queer fiction to read for the month, and why not make it a book that I've been meaning to read for a really long time, but I just kept putting off. The book is called Maurice by E.M. Forster. E.M. Forster was an English novelist who wrote several classics in the early 1900s, such as Room with a View or Howard's End, which I've also reviewed on this channel. Maurice was a book that he kept secret, though. He originally wrote it in 1914, but he wouldn't publish it during his life. So after his death in the 70s, it came out, and it was basically his coming out too, because the book is an overt exploration of a gay man navigating his relationships with other men at a time when homosexuality was criminalized, where other famous writers, such as Oscar Wilde, had gone to prison over it. It's now considered a landmark of queer literature. I was definitely excited to get to it, and I had a pretty good time with it. The story follows Maurice as he enters adulthood. He goes through university, and then later you see him beginning his career path. He's from this upper middle class family who, his father hasn't been present for a long time, so he's kind of the man of the house, and he's expected to step into this role of provider for his mother and younger sisters. His whole life has been laid out for him like this, where he's going to go to school, get a good career, meet the right woman from the same religion and class as him, and then, get married, have kids. But then he starts to realize just how much his life is going to diverge from this because of his sexuality, and because of the marginalization of the time, his sexuality could cost him everything, from his family to his freedom to his career. So throughout the book, you've got this struggle between the security and safety of staying closeted on one hand, and the authenticity and the promise of real human connection that comes from being yourself and things like that. And a lot of the characters grapple with this throughout the novel, and this intensifies over the course of the story. And it's also used to comment more broadly on English society at the time. There's this mask that everyone is kind of expected to wear, and he's questioning the need for the mask. Despite the risks that Maurice faces throughout the story, E.M. Forster does a good job of not hammering you over the head with it the whole time. The story actually feels a lot lower stakes than it is. It's slower paced, it's more understated, and while that might make people feel that it's boring, it was also kind of refreshing in a way, because a lot of queer fiction that would come out after this point really lingers on the tragedy of being gay. It reads like a Shakespearean tragedy or whatever, and while I totally understand where that comes from and why those kinds of stories are important, it can be a little bit suffocating at times. So it was nice to see that while this book definitely does linger on the melancholic and unjust elements of being gay at the time, it also has a lot of moments that are very life-affirming and touching and beautiful throughout. So it really comes at this identity from all angles. Now, like I said, it is more understated than I was expecting, and in places it was even a little bit sparsely written. It's definitely less richly realized than, say, Howard's End was, for example. Once the first part got going, I got pretty into it, but there's quite a lull in part 3 where Maurice really just starts moping around and brooding. But then part 4 really picked up and really sold me on the ending. I really appreciated how the book managed to slowly build the suspense. You've got characters discussing things like, is it even viable to expect a long-term relationship when we've got criminalization and potential blackmail? Is it possible to force ourselves to conform? But then it's made all the more potent by the fact that the characters keep referencing things like Greek philosophers, Plato and Socrates, who wrote extensively about homosexuality, and Socrates famously chose to drink poison rather than compromise on his principles. So messages like that just really struck home with me. But I don't want to lose sight of the character at the center of this story, Maurice, who is sometimes a little bit hard to like. Although he definitely has some admirable qualities, he also has some of those traits associated with the well-to-do types. He's arrogant, he steps into a pretty patriarchal role with his family, He does bad things just because they're expected of him, like bullying juniors at school, and he has a lot of insecurities that can cause him to be defensive, maybe lash out and push people away sometimes. But this frustration with his character sort of lends itself to another strength in the book, in my opinion. It would have been so easy for Forster to write Maurice as this perfect victim character, like a martyr for you to feel pity for, like Oliver Twist or something. But instead, Forster takes this warts and all approach when he writes his characters, where they're just as flawed as real people. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, and it goes a long way for making them feel real. Another thing I appreciate about Maurice's trajectory is that it shifts in relation to how he's feeling about his sexuality. When he first falls in love, you see a lot of those rough edges start to smooth away, and suddenly we see this new side of him that's carefree and easygoing and even a little bit rebellious. Then on the other hand, when he starts to run into conflict over his sexuality, he becomes withdrawn and a little bit jaded and angsty. He's almost like Holden Caulfield from Catcher in the Rye. It was also really interesting to see how Maurice fit into the larger cast of characters, which are all pretty well written as well, especially the other men in Maurice's life. Clive is a great character for complementing and clashing against Maurice's own trajectory as they each struggle to reconcile their marginalized identity in different ways. Then you've got some of the other characters in Maurice's life, such as his family, which I really liked his younger sisters, who are always calling him out on his patriarchal shit. There's a lot of dry humor that comes from that, and there's also one of the sisters kind of comes into a collision course with Maurice's own story, which is pretty interesting. I should also warn you, if you go into this book expecting it to be like super spicy and scintillating, like heated rivalry, then you're probably going to be bored, because Forster never gets into the physicality of these relationships. Instead, his goals are to link this issue of gay people being marginalized to broader issues that were being discussed in England at the time. People were pushing back against rigid social structures like class and gender and other things. So why can't gay people step out of the shadows? Why do they have to be marginalized by this arbitrary Puritan standard that's doing so much damage in other ways? He's also pushing back against all these stereotypes that are levied at gay people about them being hypersexual or degenerate or other things like that. He's linking the gay characters in this to gay characters from history, like philosophers and artists, to say that yes, we have something to contribute to society too. At a time when reactionaries are chomping at the bit to push gay and bi and trans people back into the closet, books like Maurice are very important, not only for showing just how far we've come, that queer people have always been here, but also for looking ahead, for showing why it's so important to keep up the fight against, oppression, against Puritan standards that would have us divided. Maurice has a lot to say, and while it definitely still had some lulls, some slow parts, especially in the middle, I still quite enjoyed it. I would give it a 7 out of 10. I would say it connects with me more than most of the contemporary queer fiction I've been reading, probably because it's a lot more literary. It's so valuable to have a classic novelist like E.M. Forster writing basically from beyond the grave, talking about his experience of being gay in this time and place. And if you want a classic queer fiction that has a little bit more of a bite to it, then I know a book about lesbian vampires from the 1870s called Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu. That's another great novel, but yeah. That's my review. Let me know if you've been reading anything for Pride Month, if you have any favorite queer books or anything like that. I'd love to hear from you. If you have read Maurice and have thoughts on it, please share below as well. But anyway, that's me. I've been deep in the reads. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.